He drained our daughter's insulin fund so he could buy his mistress a birthday necklace. And when I begged him, actually got down on my knees and begged him to refill that prescription, my husband laughed. Then he walked upstairs, packed a suitcase with my own clothes, set it by the front door, and told me I had 1 hour to disappear from his life. What he didn't know was that I had already been documenting everything for 3 weeks. And in exactly 6 days, his own company's accounting department was about to uncover the fraud that would destroy him. My name is Sienna. I was 34 years old, and until that Tuesday night in October, I thought the worst thing that could ever happen to me was watching my 7-year-old daughter Nova get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I was wrong. The worst thing was realizing the man I married would rather let her suffer than give up the woman he was hiding in a rented condo 11 miles from our house. Let me back up, because you need to understand how ordinary our life looked from the outside. Holden and I met at a community college orientation 11 years ago. He was charming in that easy salesman way, the kind of charm that made you feel like the only person in the room. Back then, I thought that charm was reserved just for me. Looking back now, I understand it was simply his default setting, something he switched on for anyone useful to him in the moment. He worked his way up at a regional logistics company, eventually managing a district of drivers and warehouse contracts. I worked part-time as a dental hygienist and took care of Nova full-time after her diagnosis 2 years ago flipped our entire household upside down. Before Nova got sick, our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was steady. We argued about normal things, whose turn it was to do the dishes, whether we could afford a family vacation that year. Holden worked long hours, and I never questioned it, because that's what providers do, or so I believed. I look back now and wonder how many of those long hours over the years were something else entirely, quietly building toward the version of him I met in that kitchen the night he handed me a suitcase. Type 1 diabetes isn't something you manage once and move on from. It's finger pricks when needed, along with her continuous glucose monitor. It's counting carbohydrates on every single label. It's waking up at 3 in the morning because her blood sugar dropped too low in her sleep. And it's insulin, real, non-negotiable, twice-daily insulin that keeps her alive. Without it, a child doesn't just get sick. She goes into a crisis that can put her in the hospital within hours. Our insurance covered most of it, but there was always a gap. The copay, the continuous glucose monitor sensors, the backup vials we kept in case a shipment was delayed. We'd built a system, a budget, a rhythm. Or so I thought. The first sign something was wrong came on a Thursday in September. I went to the pharmacy to pick up Nova's monthly refill, and the pharmacist told me the insurance authorization had been declined because our account showed a payment reversal from 3 weeks earlier. I stood there confused, because I hadn't reversed anything. I called Holden from the parking lot, my voice already shaking, and he brushed it off. Said it was probably a bank error. Said he'd handle it. He didn't handle it. 2 weeks later, the same thing happened again. This time I paid out of pocket, nearly $200 we didn't have lying around, because I wasn't about to let my daughter go without medication over a paperwork mix-up. I asked Holden that night, calmly, what was going on with our account. He got irritated. Said I was being paranoid. Said maybe I should stop obsessing over every little thing and trust him for once. I wanted to trust him. God, I wanted to. But something in my stomach had already started to twist. So I did something I'm not proud of, and something I'd do again in a heartbeat. I started paying attention. Not snooping, just paying attention. I noticed he was leaving the house on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for client dinners that never showed up on his calendar. I noticed a receipt in his jacket pocket for a restaurant across town, dated for a night he told me he was working late. I noticed he started keeping his phone face down, always, even at the dinner table, which he had never done before. 3 weeks before that October night, I found out her name. Kensley. She worked as an event coordinator at a downtown hotel, 26 years old, the kind of woman who posted every detail of her life online without a second thought. It took me 4 days of careful, quiet searching to piece together that Holden had been seeing her for at least 5 months. And it took me one more day to understand exactly where our money had been going. I remember sitting in my car outside Nova's school pickup line, scrolling through Kensley's public photos on my phone, my hands cold despite the heater blasting. There was a photo of her wearing a bracelet I recognized instantly, because I'd been the one to point it out in a store window 8 months earlier, joking to Holden that it was pretty but way out of our budget. He'd agreed with me that day. Told me we couldn't justify it with everything going on with Nova's treatment. 2 months later, it was on another woman's wrist. That was the moment something inside me went cold and quiet in a way it had never been before. Not hysterical. Not dramatic. Just quiet, the way a house goes quiet right before a storm hits. He wasn't just taking her to dinner. He was renting her a condo. He'd co-signed the lease under a name I didn't recognize until I found the paperwork buried in a drawer in his home office, a drawer I wasn't supposed to open, in a filing cabinet he thought I never touched. I remember standing there with the lease in my hands, reading his signature over and over, like if I looked at it long enough it might turn into someone else's handwriting. Here's the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. The month he signed that lease was the exact same month our insurance authorization for Nova's insulin got accidentally reversed. He had been quietly redirecting funds from our joint savings, the account we specifically kept for Nova's medical costs, into paying for that apartment and for gifts for a much younger woman. Our daughter's medication fund was financing his affair. I didn't confront him right away. I know some of you watching this would have exploded the moment you found out. But I've learned that anger without proof just gets you gaslit into an apology you don't deserve to give. So instead, I started collecting everything. Screenshots, bank statements, the lease documents, photos of the receipts. I backed it all up in 3 separate places: my email, a cloud folder, and a flash drive I kept in Nova's old diaper bag, the last place on earth Holden would ever look. I told myself I'd wait until I had enough to walk into a lawyer's office with an airtight case. I didn't expect the confrontation to happen on his terms first. Those 3 weeks of quietly gathering evidence were some of the strangest of my life. I'd smile at Holden across the dinner table, ask him how his day went, listen to him lie about client calls, and then go upstairs and photograph another bank statement the second he got in the shower. I hated how easily the lying came to me once I started. But I also understood, for the first time, exactly how easily it had been coming to him for months. I kept a small notebook hidden inside a box of Nova's old baby clothes in the attic. Dates, times, dollar amounts, screenshots printed out in case anything got deleted. Every entry felt like another brick in a wall I was building, slowly, quietly, around a version of my life I hadn't chosen but was going to have to survive anyway. It was a Tuesday night. Nova had come home from school complaining she felt shaky, and when I checked her blood sugar, it was dangerously low. I went to grab her emergency glucose tablets and realized we were down to our last 2. I also realized, with a sick drop in my stomach, that her insulin vial in the refrigerator was nearly empty and the refill authorization had been declined again, for the 3rd time. I called the pharmacy. I called our insurance. And then I called Holden, standing in the kitchen with Nova curled up on the couch, pale and trembling, asking me in a small voice why she felt so tired. He picked up on the 4th ring. I asked him, as steady as I could manage, why our daughter's insulin authorization kept getting declined. There was a pause. And then, in a tone I will never forget as long as I live, he said, "Sienna, it's just medication. Kids get sick. She'll be fine. I have other things going on right now." Other things. My daughter's blood sugar was crashing in our living room, and my husband called her insulin just medication, while defending money he'd funneled into another woman's rent. I don't remember driving to the urgent pharmacy pickup that night. I don't remember most of the next 20 minutes except gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, and Nova asking from the back seat, "Mommy, why are you crying?" I told her I wasn't. I was lying to my 7-year-old the same way my husband had been lying to me. We got her stabilized. Barely. The pharmacist personally called the insurance company and got a temporary override, but only after I broke down in the middle of the store, begging a stranger in a white coat to help my little girl because her father had other things going on. That night, after Nova finally fell asleep with her blood sugar back in a safe range, I sat Holden down at the kitchen table and asked him directly. Was there someone else? Was he taking money from our savings? I laid it out calmly, the way you'd read a grocery list, because I refused to give him the satisfaction of watching me fall apart in front of him. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair, and he laughed. An actual, genuine laugh, like I'd told him a joke at a barbecue. You knew this whole time and you're only bringing it up now, he said. Fine. Since you clearly already have your mind made up, let's make this easy. I tried one last time to reach whatever part of him used to care about Nova at all. Holden, she's 7. She almost ended up in the hospital tonight. I'm not asking you to explain the money. I'm asking you to think about your daughter for 5 minutes. He waved a hand like he was swatting away a fly. You always do this. You make everything sound like the end of the world. Kensley actually listens to me. She doesn't turn every conversation into a crisis. Hearing her name out loud in our kitchen so casually was almost worse than finding the lease had been. Like he'd stopped bothering to hide it because he no longer saw the point. He stood up, walked upstairs, and I heard him moving through our closet. 10 minutes later he came back down holding my suitcase, the same one we'd used for our honeymoon, packed with an armful of my clothes he'd grabbed off hangers without folding a single piece. He set it by the front door like he was setting out the trash. Take this and go, he said. I'll figure out Nova. You clearly can't handle things around here anyway. Something in me almost laughed at that. The idea that the man who let our daughter's insulin lapse 3 separate times was suddenly volunteering to figure out Nova. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything close to what I was thinking. I'd already decided, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, that the version of me who screamed and cried in front of him was not the version who was going to win this. I stood in my own kitchen, in the house I'd paid half the mortgage on for 8 years, being told to leave with nothing while my sick daughter slept upstairs. And I want you to know something, because I think a lot of women watching this have stood exactly where I stood. In that moment, something in me didn't break. It sharpened. I wiped my tears. I looked at him, and I said the calmest 6 words I have ever said in my life. Okay. I'll take the suitcase. He looked almost disappointed that I didn't fight harder. He had no idea what was already sitting on a flash drive in a diaper bag in the hall closet. He had no idea that the pharmacist who'd helped me that night had, at my request, printed and time-stamped a full record of every declined authorization for the past 2 months. And he had absolutely no idea that 4 days later, his own company's accounting department was going to call our house looking for him about a discrepancy in his expense reports. I didn't leave that night. I told him I'd go stay with my sister for a few days to think, which was true, but I didn't tell him the rest of the plan. I packed a real bag with real thought, important documents, Nova's medical supplies, and yes, the diaper bag, and I drove to my sister Robin's house 40 minutes away. Robin had been begging me for months to leave him. She took one look at my face at her front door and didn't ask questions. She just made tea and let me talk until 2 in the morning. Nova, thankfully, thought it was an adventure, a surprise sleepover at Aunt Robin's with her cousins. Kids have a way of not seeing the collapse happening around them until much later, and for one night, I was grateful for that. I sat on Robin's guest bed after Nova finally fell asleep, going through every screenshot and bank statement on my phone one more time, making sure nothing was missing, making sure I hadn't imagined any of it. I hadn't. It was all there, in plain black and white, more damning than I'd even let myself believe while I was still living inside it. Robin asked me the next morning what I wanted to do. Not what Holden deserved. What I wanted. Nobody had asked me that question in longer than I could remember. I want Nova safe, I told her. And I want him to understand that what he did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, over and over again. The next day, I called a family law attorney named Desmond Cole, whose office had a reputation in our area for handling exactly this kind of case: financial misconduct combined with serious child welfare concerns. I laid everything out for him: the redirected savings, the lease, the lapsed insulin authorizations, the pharmacist's documentation, and the fact that Holden had verbally told me to leave with nothing, while our daughter's medical stability was actively at risk. Desmond went quiet for a moment, then said something I'll never forget. "Sienna, you didn't just bring me a divorce case. You brought me a case involving potential neglect regarding essential medical care. And that's before we even get to what's happening with his job." That second thread is the one that changed everything. See, Holden's job required him to submit expense reports for client meetings and travel. It turned out, and I only learned this later through the divorce discovery process, that for the past several months, he had been quietly padding those expense reports, listing dinners with clients that were actually dinners with Kensley, and using the reimbursed funds to help cover the lease he'd co-signed. His company's finance department had flagged irregularities before I ever filed anything. My timing wasn't even the trigger. His own recklessness was already catching up to him. That fraud alone was enough to end his career. Nothing about my divorce filing needed to reach his employer for that to happen. When I filed for emergency custody documentation citing the lapsed medical coverage, the court took it seriously, very seriously. A judge named Harriet Voss reviewed the pharmacist's records, the bank statements showing withdrawals from the account labeled Nova Medical, and the lease agreement with Holden's signature dated the same week as one of the declined authorizations. Judge Voss did not mince words in that courtroom. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, looking directly at him, "you are telling this court that redirecting your daughter's medical fund to finance a private residence for someone outside this marriage was, in your words, not a big deal. I want to be very clear that this court disagrees completely." Holden's face went through about 4 different colors that day. His lawyer tried to argue it was a temporary cash flow issue, which fell apart the second the judge asked why the temporary issue only ever seemed to affect Nova's insulin and never his dinners with Kensley. I sat in that courtroom in a plain gray blazer Robin had lent me, watching the man I'd built a life with try to explain away a pharmacist's time-stamped records with a straight face. Desmond had warned me beforehand not to react, no matter what was said, and I held on to that instruction like a rope. When the judge read the bank statement totals out loud, the exact dollar amount that had gone from Nova Medical into the lease account over 5 months, I watched Holden's jaw tighten, but he still wouldn't look at me. He looked at the table. He looked at his lawyer. He never once looked at me, or at the folder with Nova's medical history sitting on the plaintiff's table. Judge Voss set a follow-up hearing date for the custody terms, but by the tone in her voice, I think everyone in that room already understood which way this was heading. 2 weeks after that hearing, his company terminated him. Turns out corporate fraud on expense reports, even relatively modest amounts, is the kind of thing that doesn't get a second chance in a logistics company handling multi-million-dollar contracts. He lost the job that had funded the affair in the first place. And Kensley? She found out about the termination the same week she found out Holden had never actually divorced me before signing that lease, because legally, at the time, he hadn't. I wasn't the only one he'd been lying to. When his income disappeared and the truth about his still married status came out, she left within the month. Packed her own bags, in her own version of the suitcase moment, except nobody handed it to her. She chose to walk. I got full physical custody of Nova. Holden was granted supervised visitation only, pending a review of his financial stability and a parenting course the court mandated given the documented lapse in her medical care. During the property settlement, the court awarded me the marital home, weighing his diversion of shared funds away from a dependent child's essential medical care as a significant factor. It wasn't revenge. It was simply what the law said was fair once everything was laid on the table. The night the divorce was finalized, I sat on our back porch, my back porch now, and watched Nova ride her bike in slow circles around the yard, her glucose monitor sending steady, calm readings to the app on my phone. No red alerts. No shaking hands. No calling pharmacists at 10 at night begging for mercy. I thought about that suitcase by the front door. How he meant it as an ending. How he wanted me to walk out with nothing so I'd understand exactly how small he thought I was. But that suitcase became the first thing I packed on my own terms, filled with the exact evidence that would cost him his marriage, his mistress, and his career in that order. I used part of the settlement to start something small but meaningful, a local fund that helps cover emergency insulin costs for families in our county who hit an insurance gap the way we did. I named it after my grandmother, who raised 4 kids on a factory paycheck and never once let any of them go without something they needed. It's not big. It's not going to change the healthcare system. But it means some other mother, standing in a pharmacy at 10 at night with a shaking child in the back seat, might get an answer faster than I did. The first family we helped was a single father 2 towns over whose insurance had lapsed after a layoff, right as his son's prescription was due for renewal. When I handed him the card covering the gap, he didn't say much. He just nodded, blinked hard a few times, and thanked me in a voice that cracked halfway through the sentence. I understood that silence completely. I'd lived inside it myself, standing in a pharmacy line with my own child needing something no parent should ever have to fight this hard for. Nova is doing well now. Her numbers are stable. She still checks her monitor obsessively, a habit she picked up from watching me do it during the scariest months, and I'm slowly teaching her that it's okay to trust the routine instead of living in fear of it. Some nights, when she's asleep and the house is quiet, I still think about how close I came to believing him, how close I came to accepting that I was the unreasonable one, the paranoid one, the wife who made everything sound like a crisis. I think about how easy it would have been to keep quietly patching the gaps in Nova's coverage myself, saying nothing, letting him keep both lives running side by side indefinitely. I don't know how long that could have gone on. I'm just grateful I never had to find out. As for Holden, the last I heard, he was working a much smaller job 2 counties over, still paying off the debt from that lease he signed for a woman who left the second his paycheck did. If you're watching this and some part of your story sounds familiar, if someone has ever tried to convince you that you're the unreasonable one for simply wanting your child to get what she needs, I want you to remember something. The people who hand you a suitcase and tell you to leave with nothing are usually the ones who end up with nothing themselves. Save your evidence. Save your strength. And never ever apologize for choosing your child over someone else's comfort. If this story moved you, hit subscribe to Sophie Revenge, because we post a brand new true-to-life story just like this one every single day. Let me know in the comments, would you have confronted him the moment you found the receipts, or would you have built your case quietly the way I did?